The prince's ascetic practices had come to naught. 6 years had flowed by in vain. The prince decided that he would no longer fruitlessly mortify his body. He decided to partake of food, nurture his body, and attain release of the mind. After bathing himself in the river Naranjana, he clung to tree roots and climbed up the river bank. Then, with great difficulty, he walked into a neighboring village. At that time, Sujata, the daughter of Senanipati, a landowner in Uravilva, had made preparations to make offerings to the tree divinities. She had squeezed the milk of healthy cows, had cooked milk gruel, and had gone into the forest, hoping to offer it to the tree divinities on the day of the full moon of the 4th month. In the forest, she caught sight of an ascetic who was weak and emaciated. Moved by a feeling of reverence, she offered the ascetic her milk gruel and said,
"Venerable ascetic, please take pity on me and accept this offering."
The prince accepted it and gathered his strength. Thinking that through this he might attain enlightenment, he concluded that there still existed a ray of hope. Kondinaya and the 4 other ascetics were both dumbfounded and suspicious. They thought that the prince had abandoned his practice. Therefore, showing their disdain, they forsook the prince and departed for the deer park in Varanasi. The prince, regaining his strength through the offering of milk gruel, made his way to the forest, which was luxuriant with foliage. The land there was flat, and the view in the 4 directions was clear. Pliant grasses grew beautifully, and in the middle of the forest a huge pipala tree, thick with foliage, spread its branches like a celestial canopy. Beautiful flowers bloomed with a pleasant fragrance. The prince received an offering of kusa grass from the child of a grass cutter who happened to be there and made it his seat. He vowed,
"If I am not able to attain enlightenment here, I shall not rise from this seat alive."
The prince believed that this was the time to subjugate Mara. He emitted the light of wisdom from the white curl on his forehead. Mara's palace rattled and shook, provoking great fear. Mara writhed in agony as if he had drunk poison. He then concocted a scheme to throw the mind of the prince into confusion. He dispatched 3 evil spirits and had them approach the prince. Their robes of fine silk were as light as feathers, flowers adorned their hair beautifully. They were alluring. The 3 danced and sang gracefully and beautifully. They tried in every way to seduce the prince. They sang,
Spring comes, the sun's rays provide warmth, and young buds have sprouted. O handsome lord, why do you abandon the pleasures of youth and seek enlightenment, which lies far away? You do not look at us, with our beauty, us, with whom even ascetics who have retreated from this floating world have become infatuated.
The prince spoke to the 3. He said,
"As the reward of your past karma, you now possess the bodies of celestial beings, but before long, you will be assailed by the impermanence of aging and death. Your figures are captivating, but your minds are not true. It is as if a beautiful colored vase were filled with foul-smelling poison. Greed is the source of self-destruction. It is the cause of descent into the realm of evil."
King Mara was incensed and immediately assembled 100,008,000 demons. He had them storm the base of the pipala tree, firing their crossbows and brandishing their swords. Heaven and earth were enveloped in darkness, and the sound of the thunder was terrifying. Demons, evil spirits, and their cohorts, all with grotesque appearances, some with the heads of lions, bears, bulls, or horses, some with the heads of human beings and the bodies of snakes. These monsters with bared fangs and glittering claws spewed forth flames of poison, rained down all kinds of weapons, and advanced against the prince. This was the outbreak of a great battle between the great King Mara and the prince, the savior of this world. In the sky, 1,000 stars streaked by, black clouds swirled about, and the great earth and the great ocean, struck by typhoons, quivered like the petals of a flower. Tidal waves rolled across the great sea, and rivers rose up, leveling mountains on which ancient trees 1,000 years old had grown in abundance. The vibrations from the blows and the howls were truly terrifying. The whole world was covered over as with a black curtain, the sun lost its light, and the sky was filled with hordes of monsters. King Mara, at the head of a great army of 100,000, swooped down on the prince from 4 sides. The gods who up to that time had surrounded the prince and had sung his praises fled in fear. Now there was no one who could save the prince, but the prince thought to himself,
"The 10 precepts that I have practiced for a long period of time are my mighty army. They are the jeweled sword and the stalwart shield that guard my being. Carrying the virtuous practice of these 10 precepts in my hand, I shall annihilate the army of demons."
He remained completely unmoved. Mara lured the wind divinity into creating gale. He remained completely unmoved. Mara lured the wind divinity into creating gale winds, but even the edges of the prince's garments remained unruffled. Urging the rain divinity on, he had torrential rains pour down, but not even dew or droplets of water could wet the prince. He poured down rains of rocks, swords, and fire, but they were all transformed into a crown of flowers, and, changing into scented powder, they were scattered all over the ground. Even the darkness that King Mara shot forth was transformed into the sun's radiance as it neared the prince. The weapons that were hurled at him changed into a celestial canopy. There was nothing that could harm the prince. King Mara came striding to the front of his army and shouted. The prince, however, solemnly pointed to the great earth and said,
"In this world encompassed by heaven and earth, I am the only one worthy of sitting on this throne. Only he who is adorned with the roots of merit from the distant past is worthy of occupying this throne. Divinity of the earth, quickly make your presence known and confirm what I say here."
And suddenly the great earth underneath the throne opened up, and the divinity of the earth appeared. King Mara's mind was shattered by the thundering roar that accompanied the divinity's appearance. Trembling with fear and without even looking back toward his cohorts, he scampered away into the four directions. After some time had passed, Mara appeared once more. Changing his tactics, he tried to seduce the prince with honeyed words.
How terrible is the color of your sickly, emaciated face. Truly your death is close at hand. Death is a great part of you. Life is only a small part. Live, it is good to live. Live and perform good deeds. Perform pure deeds. Worship fire, and your merits will be many. Why do you strive so fruitlessly? The path is hard to tread and difficult to attain.
Without wavering, the prince rebuked Mara.
Demon, slave of sloth, why do you come here? I have no need of merits. Why do you exhort me to live, me, who diligently strive on the path with faith, exertion, and wisdom? Even the river that flows is dried up by hot winds. How should my blood that strives on diligently not dry up? Blood dries up, fat melts, flesh wastes away, but the mind becomes all the more pacified. Right mindfulness and wisdom become clear, and my meditative state becomes all the more steadied. In years past, I experienced the utter limits of the pleasures of the 5 desires. I no longer look to those desires. Behold this pure being. As for you, your first army is lust, your second army is aversion, your third army is hunger and thirst, your fourth army is craving, your fifth army is sloth, your sixth army is fearfulness, your seventh army is doubt, your eighth army is vanity and obstinacy, your ninth army is fame and profit, your 10th army is self-praise and casting aspersion on others. Demon, these are your armies, these are your weapons, but the hero emerges victorious, subjugating these armies, and attains peace. Instead of living in defeat, it is far better to do battle and die. But should they go to defeat to Mara's armies even once, mendicants and sages alike will be unable to recognize, know, or practice the path of the virtuous ones. Mara, riding atop a huge elephant, you came leading a whole army. Come, do battle. I shall emerge victorious. You will not throw me into disorder. Although the human and celestial worlds were both unable to destroy your army, I shall defeat your army as a rock destroys tree leaves. With a mind that is true and thoughts that are upright, put to rest your desires. I shall travel throughout the world and train numerous disciples. If they train diligently, follow my teaching, and attain desirelessness, in the end, sorrow will be no more.
Mara, seeing that there was nothing to be gained in doing battle, was dejected and sorrowful.
For 7 years, I pursued the world-hallowed one, but I was unable to find a weakness in the enlightened one, who abides in right mindfulness. There is a rock that looks like tender meat. Birds flock together and try to taste its sweetness but are unable to do so and depart. I am like the bird that pecks at such rocks.
Mara was crushed, and with a heavy, heavy heart, he faded away. In this way, the prince in one day reached the summit, attained tranquility of mind, and entered into a meditative state. First, he parted with desire and evil. In the first meditative state, he tasted joy and bliss. He advanced to the second meditative state, and, stopping the uncontrolled activity of the mind, he immersed himself in the bliss of meditation. Advancing to the third meditative state, he entered a state of equanimity and extinguished pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. Moving on to the fourth meditative state, with a tranquil, pure, unstained, and pliant mind that could not be disturbed by anything, he contemplated his past lives. At the outset of the first night, as he recalled in detail numerous lives of the distant past, he attained the first wisdom, took leave of ignorance, and dispelled the darkness. Next, he strove to understand the forms of birth and death that people undergo. With a pure, divine eye, he saw scenes of people undergoing birth and death and being borne along the stream in accordance with their actions.
Oh, the ocean of birth and death swirls around and around without end, and people sink into and drift on a boundless stream. Nowhere is there any support.
He then saw those who accumulate evil, malign arhats, harbor wrong views, and walk around and around on the evil path. He also saw those who accumulate good karma, follow the arhats, hold correct views, and walk on the good path. In the middle of the night, he attained the second wisdom, and taking leave of ignorance, he dispelled the darkness. Next, with the wisdom that extinguishes defilement, he strove and clearly saw what was suffering, what was the cause of suffering, what was the extinction of suffering, and what was the path that led to the extinction of suffering. Again, he clearly saw what was defilement, what was the cause of defilement, what was the cessation of defilement, and what was the path that led to the cessation of defilement. By virtue of this enlightened wisdom, his mind was freed from lust and ignorance and gave birth to a wisdom that attained emancipation, namely, the wisdom that vows.
Birth has come to an end. I have completed the pious practice. I have accomplished that which I had to accomplish. This is my final birth. After this, I shall never again be born in samsara.
At the end of the night, he attained this third wisdom, took leave of ignorance, and dispelled the darkness. At this time, the great earth trembled with joy, and the world shone brightly. Divine beings, like clouds, gathered together, rained down celestial flowers, played celestial music, and sang the praise of the world-honored one, who, in great joy, recited this verse.
I sought the builder of this house of suffering, but I was unable to find him. The wheel of samsara turned around and around, and I repeated lives of suffering again and again. But you, builder of the house, I see you now. You will not build the house again. All the rafters are broken, and the ridgepole is destroyed. My mind takes leave of craving and attains nirvana.
In this way the prince became a man worthy of receiving offerings from the world. He became a man of true enlightenment, namely, a Buddha. The prince was 35 years old. It was the dawn, around the hour that the planet Venus glittered in the morning sky. In this way, the world-honored one attained enlightenment at the base of the Bodhi tree on the banks of the river Naranjana, which flowed through the forest of Uravilva. For 7 days, he sat motionless and savored the bliss of enlightenment. During the first watch of the 7th day, he meditated, forwards and backwards, on the principle of dependent origination for which all sufferings arise. He perceived that from ignorance arose karmic activity, from karmic activity arose consciousness, from consciousness arose name and form, from name and form arose the 6 sensory organs, from the 6 sensory organs arose contact, from contact arose feelings, from feelings arose desire, from desire arose grasping, from grasping arose becoming, from becoming arose birth, and that from birth arose old age and death, anxiety, sorrow, pain, suffering, and anguish. He saw that the whole accumulation of suffering arose in this manner. Therefore, if ignorance were extinguished without any residue, karmic activity would cease. If karmic activity were extinguished, consciousness would cease. If consciousness ceased, name and form would cease. If name and form were extinguished, the 6 sensory organs would cease. If the sensory organs were extinguished, contact would cease. If contact were extinguished, feeling would cease. If feeling were extinguished, desire would cease. If desire were extinguished, grasping would cease. If grasping were extinguished, becoming would cease. If becoming were extinguished, birth would cease. If birth were extinguished, then old age and death, anxiety, sorrow, pain, suffering, and anguish would cease. He saw that the whole accumulation of suffering would be extinguished in this manner. In the middle and last watches of the night, following the same procedure, the world-honored one meditated, forwards and backwards, on these 12 links of dependent origination. He then entered into the following contemplation. Originally all dharmas are equal. Their natures are not immutable, and their forms are not differentiated. Originally they are pure entities that are unstained by defilements, therefore, they are equal. Those who practice the path must meditate on the equality of all dharmas, with great compassion as primary. They must broaden their great compassion and contemplate the states of birth and extinction that rule this world, and they must think in the following manner: in this world, differentiated beings come into being because of clinging to a self. If one ceases being attached to a self, one will not recognize the existence of differentiated beings. All are equal, but ordinary people continually produce wrong views. Because of ignorance, they close their eyes, perform various acts while clinging to a self, and as a result give birth to a self that is subject to birth and death. For them karma is like a rice field, and consciousness is like seeds. Enshrouded in ignorance, they sprinkle the seeds with the water of desire. With a mind attached to a self, they water the seeds and breed more wrong views. This is the process that produces a self composed of name and form. Because of name and form, the 6 sensory organs, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and consciousness, are produced. From the 6 sensory organs, contact arises. From contact, feeling arises. From feeling, desire arises. From desire, grasping arises. From grasping, becoming is produced. From becoming, there is birth. From birth, there is old age and death. Because of old age and death, anxiety, sorrow, pain, suffering, and anguish come into existence. But in the 12 links of dependent origination, there is nothing that comes into existence and nothing that dissipates into non-existence. Conditions merely come together to produce becoming, and when those conditions dissipate, it turns into nothingness. Ordinary people do not know that the absolute truth embodies equality, therefore, they perceive differentiation among the 12 links of dependent origination. If one becomes aware that in truth there are no differentiations such as self and the object to which a self attaches itself, or an agent that produces and objects that are produced, then the 3 worlds to which one is attached are seen to be only the shadows of a deluded mind, and all attachments cease. Truly these 12 links of dependent origination all arise out of the mind. This was his contemplation. In the ocean of the serene mind of the world-honored one, all things now were reflected as bright images. There are no words to praise adequately this state of mind.